This is the creek behind the Hans mill site. Further up the creek, which is incidentally called Shoals Creek. The weather has been very dry. That's why the water level is so far below and much below the flood level. This is the surrounding meadow. Around the old mill site. Note the sign in the background that was that a picture was taken of previously. A member of the reorganized church told me this morning that there were 17 people, mainly men, who were massacred on this site. One being a 10-year-old boy who attempted to hide behind the blacksmith forge, but was discovered and subsequently killed along with the rest. The bodies were then placed in an old well, and attempts were made to cover them over. A member of the church then did all she could in recovering the bodies out of the old well and giving them a proper burial. This is one of the fields in the surrounding area of Hans Mill that was at one time owned by the Saints, that the Saints were persecuted out of. And this is directly across the road from the last picture, the last field. This is the valley of Adamondiaman. This is still another view of the valley of Adamondiaman, taken from further down the slope, as these pictures will show. On this large valley is bordered on the south, left side, and west and river, which is hidden from view by trees. The elevated land and valley Roaring Hill, which rise to a gentle summit. In May 838, the feast of Latter-day Saints came to this area with a surveying party. Near the site, settlers began to improve home lot. Dozen cabins were begun with the expectation to build a large Mormon with immigrant Canada areas. St. Constance stay here was short. When in late October 1908, the action of their leader for protection in far west, St. committed elsewhere. Even then, the troubles came in the latter days of their homes, improvements, and traveled eastward to a beautiful bend of the Mississippi River, only 19,000 people. To in pioneer to the basin, developed the mountains.
This is my mother and father, who we should get a close-up on. We are here at Adam-on-Diamond. And if we get a width view, here we are. Now, they are on an unusual-looking rock, and there is also an unusual-looking rock. And here they are again.
I'm moving because the sun's in my eyes.
Okay. Oh, and here is the pop can my mom hid away there, but she's taking it out.
Okay,
So
shut it off.
this sheep looks. Here's a
Shut it off,
preview
please.
of this sheep.
You can go around the tower hill.
Clever on tower. Dawn, save some film, and batteries are just about dead. The road to a place in Adam-on-Diamond that they call Tower Hill. This is a field of rye. This is the area known as Tower Hill. I got your picture, dear.
181 yards over
This inscription, 9 May 1838, a surveying party led by Joseph, prophet and first president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, arrived here to found a new city. Follower of the prophet, Lyman White, had already acquired a home on the side of the hill southwest to the right of this point overlooking the valley. A half-mile up the river, White operated a ferry, and inland from that location, the prophet began laying out a city. He called it Adam-on-Diamond, in tribute to Adam, the patriarch of the human race. When established 35 miles to the southwest, had already doubled in size from its original plat of 1 square mile. The prophet desired to found other settlements after this. His party spent near later to stake out land on both sides and eastward. In the vicinity, he said, there were remains of an old Nephite altar or tower, church 5. Settlement here proceeded as Latter-day Saints immigrated from Ohio and other areas. Within many cabins were under construction. In early October, several hundreds arrived. The city was similar in design to others established in pioneering Latter-day Saints. Around a central square, streets followed a grid pattern with lots assigned according to the needs of individual families. Joseph Smith organized the diamond stake here on 28 June 1838, with John Smith as president and Lyman White as Reynolds Cahoon as counselors. A high council and a bishop were called. In late October, as persecution and opposition to the Latter-day Saints settlers increased, they were called by the prophet to gather at Far West for protection. From there, in the early spring of 1839, they withdrew to Illinois, where on the east side of the Mississippi River they built a beautiful and large city known as Nauvoo. After the Latter-day Saints left Adam-on-Diamond, a small town known as Cravensville, with a population of about 200, existed in this area for about 30 years. The Latter-day Saints' desire for building cities, which was exhibited here and elsewhere, enabled the pioneers to eventually settle 350 towns in the Intermountain West with their new headquarters at Salt Lake City, Utah. A view of the valley below from Tower Hill. Leaving Adamondiaman, this is a field of alfalfa.
(1846 and 47), but a very good replica, we think, because when they put this up as an elders quorum project about 10 years ago, the city of Omaha made them put a slab under the floor. So it's got a real good floor. In the old days, if there was any floor, it was just some slab from the sawmill laying on the dirt. Most of them didn't have any kind of floor, just the dirt. The fireplace is totally out of place for that time. They had nothing like that. They cooked in a little lean-to outside when the weather was nice, and they had a hole in the center of the dirt floor where they cooked and kept warm in the wintertime. I learned recently that some of them had little sod ovens in the end of the cabin where they could cook and keep warm. So that was something new I read about. But there wasn't very many of those. This is a bigger cabin too than most of those. This is 12 by 18 feet, and most of those cabins were 10 by 10 and 12 by 12. The children slept in the loft, and the adults shared the floor. And when I say shared the floor, normally at least that first year there was 2, sometimes 3 families in each cabin. Depend on the size and number of people. They didn't mind sharing because the alternative was to sleep on the ground in a tent if there was a tent available for them. So they had their problems, and it says in the cracks in the logs here, they didn't have any good clay around here, and it was a mixture of mud and water, and the wind would dry it out and blow it out pretty much, almost as fast as they put it in. It says in the record that that was the responsibility of the children assigned to the cabin. But if they didn't do it, somebody else had to, because it had to be done to keep the cabin warm. What else can I tell you? When they cut the logs, they saved the branches off of those logs. Now those poles up there represent those branches, but those are nice and even. And can you picture what it would look like if you laid put up the walls of a cabin, and then laid the branches from the trees on top, and then laid sod on top of that from 4 to 6 inches thick?
Thank you, Brother Means, for letting me do
I don't know
that.
where we left off now, so what do we talk about? Start with
Those
the
who
fire.
they were grateful to share.
Okay, they didn't mind sharing because the alternative to not sharing was sleeping on the ground in a tent if there was any tent available. And then it came to the cracks in the logs. They didn't have any good clay around here, and they used a mixture of mud and water. And they said in the record that that was the job of the responsibility of the children who lived in the cabin to do that. But if they didn't do it, somebody else had to, because the wind dried it out and blew it out almost as fast as they put it in. We'd have a lot heavier weather than we have around here now, I guess. Also, somebody got the bright idea to use commercial caulking in these logs, and the maintenance man for the church says, take that out or we're going to take the cabin down. Well, nobody wants to admit who put it in, and I don't know, because it was here when I came. But I know you have to take the cabin down to get it out, because it's hard as a rock. And he said it's not natural, and it's not authentic, is what he said, so it shouldn't be there. And I was telling about the branches. They cut off the trees, and then when they cut the logs, they cut the branches off and saved those to get the walls up. And when they got the walls up, they laid those branches on top. Now those even poles up there represent those branches. But if you picture what it would look like if you just laid branches on top of that. Then on top of that, they put sod of 4 to 6 inches thick. And because of those uneven branches, a lot of times there were low places and it leaked. And so it wasn't always dry in each cabin. The sod roof keeps it just a little bit warmer in the winter and a little cooler in the summertime. There's probably 5 or 6 degrees in the summertime, I've noticed in here outside. What else can I tell you? That's about it.
So this does have a sod roof?
Hmm?
This does have a sod roof?
Yeah, but there's a piece of plastic between, on top of those poles up there, so this one don't leak. But they didn't have that kind of stuff in the old days, just the sod and those branches. Let's go up to the cabin. Oh yeah, they made things like this, little washboards and measuring baskets here when they were here in winter quarters to sell or trade for food.
This is the outside of the cabin that we have just viewed. It does have a sod roof. That's why the plants are growing out of it. This is of the visitor center at winter quarters. That is the cabin that we previously viewed. This is more of the visitor center. Some construction taking place. And across the street we have the Pioneer Cemetery, where many of the saints who perished during the migration died and were buried. The front of the visitor center at winter quarters. This inscription reads, Pioneer Mormon Cemetery, 1846 and 47 to 1863. It is estimated that 600 immigrants were buried here. This is a marker beside the entrance to the cemetery, and this is the entrance to the cemetery. This inscription reads, "The dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God. They that hear shall live." John 5, chapter 5, verse 25. For they shall rest from their labors here and shall continue their work. Doctrine and Covenants, section 124, verse 86. And this inscription reads, "In loving memory of the 6,000 devoted pioneers who died on the plains between 1846 and 1869, the bodies of nearly 600 of those brave souls were buried within this sacred enclosure." And this inscription reads, "On June 14, 1846, the first wagon train of Mormon pioneers traveling westward reached the banks of the Missouri River. Since it was too late in the year to travel far, Brigham Young, their leader, proposed an encampment be established. The camp was to be a sanctuary against the bitter winter. As provisions were scarce, it also would give them time to prepare for the resumption of their journey in the spring. A site was selected on a plateau overlooking the Missouri River. The name chosen was Winter Quarters. This wilderness community swelled to 3,483 souls. And this inscription reads, "Preparations for the winter began." Soon after the Latter-day Saints arrived in winter quarters, labor parties began to prepare for the approaching winter. Lots were plotted and assigned, and practically overnight a city sprang up. Houses, built of logs, covered with willows or prairie sod, lined the dirt streets. Openings were dug into the hillside and enclosed with willows or sod to form dugouts. While some workers built these crude houses, others were plowing land and sowing seed for the next year's crops. This hopefully would sustain them when they again began their westward trek. And this inscription reads, "Sickness rages through the camp." The great difficulty at winter quarters, however, was not physical hardships or extreme cold only. It was a weakening plague which spread throughout the camp. As early as July, 37% of the community were down with this fever. Source of the sickness was found in swamps full of mosquitoes. Coupled with the plague, privation and exposure also took a terrible toll of these pioneers. And before the encampment at winter quarters was abandoned, over 600 men, women, and children had been laid to rest, many in this very cemetery. And this inscription reads, "Winter quarters abandoned." Winter quarters was only a temporary settlement. On May 27th, 1848, the wagons began rolling out of camp. Within days, the city up on the plateau loomed desolate and forsaken. Under the inspired leadership of Brigham Young, these Mormon pioneers penetrated deep into the uninhabited American frontier. Their destination proved to be the west slope of the Rocky Mountains, where they founded Salt Lake City, Utah, and 357 additional settlements stretching from Mexico to Canada. Winter conditions and the 600 courageous pioneers resting in this cemetery recall the perseverance and dedication of these Latter-day Saints. This is a wall on which the epitaphs that have just been recorded are mounted. This is the monument of a brother and sister sadly viewing the remains of their small child who has died and is about to be buried. And just below the monument, an inscription reads, "This monument is placed directly over the graves of an unknown child and 7 other pioneers." And below that, there is a written inscription taken from the hymn, "Come, Come Ye Saints." It says, "Gird up your loins, fresh courage take. Our God will never us forsake." This is the area surrounding the monument. Has been very beautifully done. A lot of thought and effort and hard work has certainly gone into this edifice, into the construction of this edifice. and certainly is meaningful to anyone that views it. This inscription reads 1846. On this lot stands the old mill built during the westward migration of the Mormons, purchased by Jacob Weber in 1860, now owned and operated by his descendants. This inscription reads, Nebraska Historical Marker, the Florence Mill. The Florence Mill, one of the earliest in Nebraska, was constructed by the Mormons at winter quarters during the winter of 1846 and 1847. Supplying both flour and lumber, the water-powered mill enabled the Mormons to cope more readily with the adverse conditions encountered during their stay in Nebraska. In 1847 and 1848, groups of Mormons began to leave this area for the Salt Lake Valley, and as a result, winter quarters and the mill were abandoned. In 1856, Alexander Hunter began to operate the mill. Its products helped fill the demands created by the growing town of Florence, established in 1854 on the old site of winter quarters. In 1870, Jacob Weber had acquired the operation. Flour became its most important product, and by 1880, steam had largely replaced water as the motive force. The mill was further modified in later years to meet changing demands, and it continued to operate under the direction of second and third generation members of the Weber family. Spanning more than a century, the history of the Florence Mill reflects the important contribution of the milling industry to the development of Nebraska. This is a historical marker close to Fremont, Nebraska, on Highway 30 west, and the inscription reads, "The Great Platte River Road West." The north bank of the Platte River, from the 1830s through the 1860s, served as a major overland route to the west. It was used by fur traders, soldiers, gold seekers, and other immigrants. The expedition of Major Stephen H. Long passed through this area in June 1820. Just south of the river were the last villages of the Pawnee Nation, prior to their being placed on a reservation. Fremont was named in honor of General John G. Fremont when settled in 1856. This trail is usually referred to as the Mormon Trail, as they were the first to use it in great numbers. This route was also known as the Omaha-Fort Kearny Military Road, and the stage line between Omaha and Salt Lake City also ran here. It became the line of the first transcontinental telegraph in 1861, and a few years later it became the route of the Union Pacific Railroad, the first transcontinental route. The railroad reached Fremont in 1866, and in a few years the Platte Valley of Nebraska ceased to be a frontier, becoming a prosperous farming region. With the development of the automobile, this route became U.S. Highway 30, or the Lincoln Highway, the first transcontinental road. It was completed to San Francisco in 1913, though the portion of the road west of Fremont was not paved until 1920. Begun as a major road to the west, it developed into and remains an important route to the east as well. This historical marker is located just north of the town and marker that we previously photographed. About 5 miles west of the previous photographed. In the previously mentioned, and it reads Overland Trail 1813 to 1867, 1847 to 1864. Military Road to New Fort Kearny, 1856. The site of Albion, Lincoln P.O. and Timberville from 1856 to 1868. Erected by Dodge County, May 30, 1928. Another marker, approximately 15 miles west. Last one reads on Mormon Trail 47, Road 1856, of area by George Young and Robert Miller. We have no way of telling if the Young is related to Brigham Young or not. July 4, 18 southwest, where Seth Young, the first son of Dodge County settler, November 1856. Here in the town of Columbus, Nebraska, There is a monument, and on it reads about the North brothers. The West produced many fighting men, and ranking high among them are Frank and Luther North of Columbus, leaders of the legendary Pawnee Scouts. The Pawnee, located at their nearby reservation, were eager to cooperate with the Army in fighting their hereditary enemies, the Sioux and the Cheyenne. Organized as a fighting unit in 1864, they participated in the Powder River campaigns of 1865 and 1876 and 77, and the Republican River campaign of 1869. They also guarded the builders of the first transcontinental railroad, 1867-1869. William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill, later Frank North's ranching partner, first became associated with him in the campaign which culminated with the Battle of Summit Springs, 1869. Frank North was the commander of the Scouts and one of the West's most successful Indian fighters. The Pawnee revered him and knew him as Panay Lachar, or Pawnee Chief. He was assisted on most of the campaigns by his brother Luther. The two brothers spoke Pawnee, and a mutual respect and affection existed between them and the Indian soldiers. A number of other Columbus men, including Lieutenant Gustavus G. Beecher, served as officers of the Scouts. The Pawnee moved to Oklahoma in 1875. The North brothers lived in Columbus the remainder of their lives after having contributed a colorful chapter to the story of the West. This epitaph also is located in Columbus, Nebraska, and it says, North Branch, the Oregon Trail, gratefully dedicated to early pioneers by Platte Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, 1927. This old steam engine is located on display in Pawnee Park in Columbus, Nebraska. This monument in Pawnee Park, Columbus, Nebraska, commemorates the memory of the veterans of the Spanish-American War, (1898 to 1902). A short distance west of Lexington, Nebraska, which is 60 miles east of North Platte, Nebraska, on the Mormon Trail. Plaque marks the site of and the inscription on the monument reads, "Here on August 7, 1807, by Chief Turkey Leg on Union train handcar which the engineer car turned the handcar crew other wounded, one scalped alive, at the boat with bolt tied to pole." just the railroad tracks on which this massacre is a field of corn, farms is being taken from Highway 30, the link, the old Mormon Trail. Fort McPherson, located approximately 20 miles east of North Platte, Nebraska. The inscription on this historical mark reads, "The fort was established on the Oregon Trail on the south side of the Platte River, 1363, on the eve of intensified Indian raids on the plains. To the well-known Cottonwood Springs and McDonald Ranch, it commanded a strategic north-south Indian trail across the Platte Valley. First known as Cantonment Fort Cottonwood, in February 1866, the fort was named Major General James B. McPherson. It served to protect the important Platte Valley line of travel and communication and was the base for innumerable scouting parties and for field campaigns in 1865, 1866, and 1869. General Carr's campaign in 1869 broke the power of the Cheyennes and cleared the surrounding area from more than temporary Indian threats. The Russian Prince Alexis prepared here for his famous buffalo hunt in 1871. General Custer, Buffalo Bill, the North Brothers, and their Pawnee Scouts were often at the fort. The fort was abandoned in 1880, but a portion of the military reservation is now the Fort McPherson National Cemetery, where rest soldiers from McPherson and other frontier forts. This is the truck stop, the Texaco truck stop at North Platte, Nebraska. The water tank we see in this picture is the water tank for Ogallala, Nebraska, located on Highway 30. Ogallala is named after the Ogallala Indians. And there's a part of the Mormon Trail where the trail began to head in a northwesterly direction instead of west, up towards Wyoming, towards Casper, Wyoming. And from Casper it then continues over the mountains on its way. The trail continues over the mountains on its way to the Salt Lake Basin. This is a replica of a covered wagon. Ingeniously designed atop a hill that is named Windless Hill. Apparently was a very difficult passage for covered wagons, and many steps had to be taken to help the horses and for the wagon's descent down this steep grade. This is located approximately 30 miles northwest of Ogallala, Nebraska. This is the pathway leading to the top of the hill, from which the pioneers had to negotiate their way down. And we have here a picture of Doreen hiding behind the bush, waving, yelling at me to keep up to her, even while I'm trying to take these pictures. An inscription reads, "This ravine started as a set of wagon ruts cut through the grass and soil by heavy iron-shod wheels. It is but one example of the long interaction between man and the environment in this region." This is taken from partway up the hill. We can see the replica of the covered wagon, and beyond we see Highway 30, the Lincoln Highway, known as the Mormon Trail. The ravine we see is one that was began by the tracks of the covered wagons. Beyond it, we see the old original tracks that have been left from this time. From partway up the hill, we see the channel that has been cut through the grass and through the ground that was started by from the tracks of the original pioneer wagons that crossed this way. And further up the far slope, we are able to see some original tracks that still exist today. Beyond this point, we see Highway 30, the Lincoln Highway, in the distance past that windmill, or the Mormon Trail. Or that is known as the Mormon Trail. Sometimes they had to detour such as they did right here. We also see from this point again the replica of the covered wagon. That has been ingeniously built to commemorate the passing of the pioneers that once came this way. This is taken from still further up the slope. Looking down upon the Highway 30. And this is the point of origin of the ravine that was began by the wheels of the covered wagons of the pioneers. I don't know what this plant is. It's just below the top of the hill that we are now climbing and looking at, but it looks like big pods on it. Someone viewing these pictures sometime may be able to identify them. And this marker says Oregon Trail, marked by the state of Nebraska, 1912 Windlass Hill entrance to Ash Hollow. This is an epitaph at the top of the hill overlooking this difficult descent, and it says, "The Oregon Trail. Travelers reach this point over the trail you see stretching out across the prairie to the southeast. They left the last real settlement at Westport Landing, or at Independence, Missouri, some 600 miles from here. Most of them took about 40 days to reach this point. They were still less than a third of the way to Oregon."
Take a picture of the trail.
This is the original trail, foot trail, or horse trail, leading over to the hill on the far side. Again is the southeast direction that the epitaph on the monument describes, and we can see the flat that had to be reached by descending this hill that we are now standing upon. Another epitaph very close to the one previously photographed, on top of the hill, reads, "Here covered wagon travelers faced the most difficult terrain since their departure from Missouri. One man said, 'I cannot say at what angle we descend, but it is so great that some go so far as to say the road hangs a little past the perpendicular.'" Without a doubt, the pioneers must have faced many more difficult tasks than descending this hill would be, but it's quite fortunate that this monument has been preserved for posterity, that we may have an idea in pictures how difficult their journey really was. We are now back to the replica of the covered wagon, which the footpath leads right through, and we have some information here that tells us on the hillside before you are the tracks left by the wagons that passed here over a century ago. It says the Army too relied on wagon transport. Hundreds of 6-mule wagons like these moved the supplies for combat units in the field. Commercial freighters supplied the forts and base camps. It says the Conestoga wagon was a heavy freight wagon. Very few passed over the Oregon Trail because of the rough terrain. And below this we see thousands of immigrants passed over this trail from 1841 to 1859 in wagons similar to this. Uphill travel could be still more difficult. Sometimes wagon drivers lightened their loads and made double trips on difficult grade. Inscription says, steam crossings posted the worst hazard for the wagon traveler. Further upstream, the North Platte had to be crossed several places. Along the trails, crude ferries and log rafts served the traveler until a few bridges were built by traders. Far more immigrants, freighters, and soldiers were drowned attempting river crossings than were killed by hostile Indians. It says wagon brakes were inadequate for hills such as this, and for the many steeper grades further west. Faced with such slopes, wagon drivers locked the wheels with various devices, and sometimes had all available hands hauled back on ropes attached to the wagon. For the wagon traveler, the road from Independence, Missouri to the far west was 2,000 miles, one step at a time. This is a homestead dwelling at the bottom of Windlass Hill, and it is located at the bottom of Windlass Hill in an area called Ash Hollow. Note the sod roof. And this is a picture of the hill that had to be descended by the early pioneers. Taken from the bottom of the hill just a few yards from Highway 30. This inscription is located at Bridgeport, Nebraska, not far east of Scottsbluff. And the inscription reads, Narcissa Whitman, trailblazer and martyred missionary, is one of the great heroines of the frontier West. In 1836, she and Eliza Spaulding, following the north side of the Platte on horseback, became the first white woman to cross the American continent. The Protestant Oregon Mission was composed of Dr. Marcus Whitman, Reverend Henry Spaulding, from New York to Otay Indian Agency. Correction. Dr. Marcus Whitman, Reverend Henry Spaulding, their new brides, and William Gray. They traveled from New York to Otay Indian Agency, Bellevue, Nebraska, then joined an American fur company caravan led by Thomas Fitzpatrick. From the Green River Rendezvous, they journeyed westward with traders of the Hudson's Bay Company. In November 1847, Narcissa, her husband, and 11 others were massacred by Cayuse Indians at their Walla Walla Mission, now a National Historic Site. The missionaries passed this point in June 1836. In May 1847, the Mormon pioneers passed here en route from winter quarters, present North Omaha, to Salt Lake City. to Salt Lake Valley, calling these formations ancient bluff ruins. Beginning with the California Gold Rush in 1849, this Mormon Pioneer Trail became the Council Bluffs Road to immigrants bound for the West Coast. This is known as Chimney Rock. About 5 miles northwest of Bridgeport and about 20 miles southeast of Scottsboro. Correction on that, 20 miles southeast of Scotts Bluff. This, of course, is also, this is on Route 26 and considered the route of the Mormon pioneers. This is about 2 miles further up the road from the picture of Chimney Rock, depicting pioneer wagon and a pioneer. Encouraging his oxen along the trail. Where we have stopped here right now is beside a sign that says Oregon Trail Road. Evidently the trail, or the Mormon Pioneer Trail, must have turned at this point and took a more westward route down this road and over those hills. And of course we will definitely find short distance down the road, where down Highway 30, or 26, I'm sorry, that we are now on, we will find a place where they resume this location of Highway 20. Highway 26 west, about 10 miles from in Nebraska, about 10 miles east of the Wyoming border. We read of the Horse Creek Treaty Grounds, and it says, during September 1851, more than 10,000 Plains Indians gathered near here across the river, in brackets, which is not far from this spot, in council with the U.S. government to sign the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. Present were Ogallala and Brule Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Arikara, Assiniboine, Mandan, Gros Ventre, and Shoshone. The council met at Horse Creek, 34 miles east of Fort Laramie, because there was not enough grass for the thousands of horses near the post. Thomas Fitzpatrick, fur trader and Indian agent to the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, organized the council. David D. Mitchell, superintendent of Indian Affairs at St. Louis, and the missionary Father D. Smet also participated. The treaty outlined each tribe's territory, and they agreed to no longer fight each other. They recognized the right of the government to build roads and forts on their lands. In return, the army was to protect the Indians from white depredations, with the exception of hostilities following the Grattan Massacre in the year 1854. Tribes along the trail remained peaceful until the Indian War of 1864. Near here, on the Wyoming-Nebraska line, is the site of the first Red Cloud Agency established for the Ogallala Sioux in 1871. A short distance from the last marker, west of the last marker, is another historic marker that says Stewart Campsite, and it reads, east of Torrington, near the Wyoming-Nebraska state line, is the campsite of Robert Stewart and his party of historians. They were the men who laid out the first traveled the route from the west coast to St. Louis, which later became known as the Oregon Trail. Leaving Astoria, John Jacob Astor's fur trading post at the mouth of the Columbia River, the Astorians got as far as present-day Torrington by December 1812. According to Stewart's diary, the party constructed a small shack and spent the rest of the winter on the bank of the North Platte River. Inscription reads, immigrants participating in the great continental migrations of the mid-19th century left enduring traces of their arduous passage along trails. On soft rock faces they inscribed their names and dates of passing. These etchings not only confirm their presence on the frontier, they are evidence of the pioneers' realization that they were participants in a dramatic process. The settlement of the Trans-Mississippi West. After the first day out of Fort Laramie, immigrants paused to mark their passing at Register Cliff, a sandstone bluff 1.5 miles southeast of here. And this is Sandstone Bluff as it is today. Taken from about 1.5 miles away. But in the interest of time, we will not drive over there. This epitaph reads, Oregon Trail Ruts. Wagon wheels cut solid rock, carving a memorial to empire builders. What manner of men and beasts impelled conveyances weighing on those grinding wheels? Look, a line of shadows crossing boundless wilderness. Foremost, nimble mules drawing their carts. Come poised mountain men carrying trade goods to a fur fair, the rendezvous. So in 1830, Bill Sublette turns the first wheels from St. Louis to the Rocky Mountains. Following his faint trail, a decade later, and on through the 1860s, appear straining, twisting teams of oxen, mules, and heavy draft horses, drawing Conestoga wagons for Oregon pioneers. Trailing the Oregon-bound avant-garde, but otherwise mingling with those emigrants, inspired by religious fervor, loom footsore and trail-worn companies, Mormons dragging or pushing handcarts as they follow Brigham Young to the valley of the Salt Lake. And after 1849, reacting to a different stimulus but sharing the same trail, urging draft animals to extremely straining resources and often failing, hurry gold rushers California bound. A different breed, no immigrants but enterprisers and adventurers capture the 1860s scene. They appear multi-teamed units in draft, heavy wagons in tandem, jerkline operators and bullwhackers delivering freight to Indian war outposts and agencies. Now the apparition fades in a changing environment. Dimly seen, this last commerce serves a new pastoral society. The era of the cattle baron and the advent of settlement blot the Oregon Trail. And here we have the deeply worn ruts that were made by the wagon wheels of the pioneers as they took their strenuous journey west. This is the North Platte River, just out of Guernsey, Wyoming, on Route 26. It was this road that is, after crossing the river, became the original Oregon and Mormon Trail. As it brought its way back up and over those hills. Right alongside what today is Route 26. This is Casper, Wyoming, just after a heavy rainstorm. And this picture is taken towards the northwest of the city. This is the chapel in Custer, Wyoming. Correction, in Casper, Wyoming, at which we attended Sunday morning. And this is the same chapel from the opposite side. Incidentally, this was Sunday, July the 8th, 1990. The old Fort Casper, originally unknown to trappers and explorers, 1830-1847 brackets, as upper crossing of the North Platte River. It became the Mormon Ferry in 1847. Gennard built a bridge here in 1858, and troops from Platte Bridge Station guarded the telegraph line and protected emigrants on the Oregon Trail. July 26, 1865, the station was attacked by hordes of Indians. Lieutenant Casper Collins led an heroic attempt to rescue Sergeant Custard's wagon train, but sacrificed his life in aiding a fallen soldier. The station was renamed Fort Casper in his honor. Abandoned in 1867, fort and bridge were burned by Indians. The old fort was restored on its original foundations in 1936. The marker reads, "The Pony Express." Here was bustling Platte Bridge Station, later renamed Fort Casper, with a relay station for the Pony Express. The bridge was a catalyst drawing together wilderness wayfarers, frontiersmen, and immigrants to learn late news of trail events and civilized regions.
If you start this way, it has the arrowheads about the Indians first, and then the Mormons, and then the pioneers, and my mother's wedding dress is at the back, because that was in 1901. And there's this book here, has all these pictures that my dad took around the turn of the century, and most of them.
This is the sign that was mounted for the ferry during the time of the pioneers. We also read on June 12, 1847, Brigham Young and the first Mormon pioneer party of 149 people, traveling with a variety of wagons and pulling the revenue cutter, arrived at the upper crossing of the North Platte. They established the Mormon ferry and left 9 men to remain and operate it. This marked the beginning of commercial ferrying in the Rocky Mountains. Each autumn, prior to their return to Salt Lake City, the men would sink the ferry in the river to avoid its theft and raise the ferry in the spring for its high water operations. Mormon handcart companies, 1856-1860. This is a replica of a cart used by nearly 3,000 people, 10 companies in brackets, who pushed and pulled all their possessions 1,300 miles from Iowa to the Salt Lake Valley. Most were poor European converts who made the trip from Liverpool, England to Utah for about $45. With space on the handcarts being limited, the official rules stipulated that clothing and bedding were limited to 17 pounds for each adult and 10 pounds per child. Tents and extra provisions were carried by 5 to 8 supply wagons that traveled with each company.
That will be very simple, or not real simple, but it'll be perfect. And you can just about imagine.
An inscription reads, in 1856, the Willie Company and the Martin Handcart Companies left Iowa dangerously late and met with tragedy. Winter arrived early in Wyoming with 18 inches of snow and below zero temperatures in early October. The Willie Company lost 67 people, many near South Pass, while the Martin Company suffered 145 deaths near Devil's Gate, 5 miles west of Independence Rock. Later on, we hope to achieve get some pictures of the Devil's Gate and Independence Rock.
Now, they went like this. Of course, we can't.
Please, Don, can I have that?
You can look off out there and keep watching here. You will see, but you'll still see some of the wagon.
Yes, we have already, come down.
have not been south by city, but I've been on the other side of the line. So,
So if we come down here, accessible to,
yeah.
we were wondering which road, yeah, which road takes you into the city.
Okay, what you
Inscription reads, with a wooden frame and leather cover, the boat was nicknamed the Revenue Cutter because it was profitable for the Mormons who ran the ferry over the North Platte River. Brought here by Brigham Young in 1847, it could hold up to 1,800 pounds. And we see how it has wagon wheels on it. The wagon box is constructed in the form of a boat. I don't know for sure, but I should imagine that the boat and the wagon wheels and the running gear of the wagon must have disconnected, separated from each other. But note the oarlocks on the side of the gunnels of the boat, and it served quite a dual purpose. We are here at a replica of the old Fort Casper. The Indian wigwams set up outside the fort, as they often were in the early days. We see that it's so authentic they even have some horses on the perimeter on the other side of the fence. An old wagon and some more army tents. There is an inscription written here that reads, the battle at Platte Bridge. Early on the morning of July 26, 1865, Lieutenant Casper Collins led a troop of men to reinforce an army supply train coming into Platte Bridge Station, only a mile west of the post. The group was ambushed by members of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations. The Indians were anxious to avenge the losses they sustained at the Sand Creek Massacre the previous year. They hoped to destroy Platte Bridge Station in this attack. The Indian force heavily outnumbered the group led by Collins. During the retreat, 4 men were killed, including the 20-year-old lieutenant. The Army renamed Platte Bridge Station in honor of the young hero, since a new post in Colorado had recently been named in honor of Casper Collins' father, Colonel W.O. Collins. The name Fort Casper was chosen. This is a view from inside the fort, the same army tents that were previously photographed, and the wagon. Okay, now I gotta know your names.
Jordan. Jordan.
Gordon? Olivia? Gordon and Olivia. Well,
Jordan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Correction on that. This is Jordan and Olivia here in the old trading post at Fort Bridger, Fort Casper.
They're beautiful kids.
Are you from Landry?
Well, what I'm saying is I like that one for myself.
I love the chevrons, and I just wish there was
Remember, I
some way
like
to
the
see
Indian
them.
Trail.
Which one is it? Well, it seems to have larger, I know what it has, it has larger.
We couldn't spend this much time together without my getting a picture of you.
That's right.
Then you'll get home and you'll wonder who that gimp was.
Oh no, I'll remember. Because we'll remember about comparing injuries.
Yeah.
Telling about our sad operation. Oxen yoke that hangs here in the old store. Fur pelts.
Oh, this is the one they have up there that they took from me.
One of these right there.
Buffalo head.
Yeah, we have one, don't we?
Not that I can see.
Well, this is the one that this is a copy of the one they took. And I didn't
And
realize
the
it
buffalo
was there.
skull.
Of course I'm gonna keep this here.
Yeah.
There.
And show them, right?
Yes. Now these are made by Arapaho.
And he's what?
He's Mexican and his wife and children are Arapaho. They live on Wind River Reservation at Riverton, Wyoming.
This is the parents of the people, of the children whose pictures we had just taken. He is of Mexican descent, and she is Arapaho Indian, Arapaho Lamanite. About 10 miles, or a little less, from Casper, possibly 5 miles from Fort Casper. This is the road that represents the whole part of the old trail that leads down to the river, to the
Red Buttes Crossing.
to the Red Buttes crossing that some of the pioneers used to cross the river and to continue on what was then the main trail. We have just reached the top of a long uphill grade. That on the other side of, and on the way up there, where looked like very difficult traveling for the pioneers, and this has brought us up to a large flat plateau type area, and this is located about 30 miles northwest of Fort Casper. This is about 10 more miles northwest on this road. Will bring us to Independence Rock. received its name from a time when some of the pioneers stopped there to celebrate July the 4th. This is taken just a few miles from Independence Rock. These pictures give some idea of the terrain that was coming up, that the pioneers had to travel over. Just past that bluff that we see in the picture now is what I think would be Devil's Gap. We'll drive further down the road and find out for sure. This is Independence Rock. Just a little ways from where the Sweetwater River crosses Highway 220. In Wyoming.
Of the Mormon pioneers who passed Independence Rock June the 21st, 1847, under the leadership of Brigham Young on their way to the valley of the Great Salt Lake.
This off to put the plaques in there, right? He's just got 93 on it, I'm sure.
Oh, you can tell that it's going up there. There's some of the other ones there where it says 37, that wasn't.
Yeah, up there on the green or something.
Yeah, over here, them probably would have been carved in. But most of them, that was just scratched in.
Many marks, signs, and epitaphs have been placed on the rock to honor those who have passed this way. And there is Dawn at the top of Independence Rock.